when David was about to be made king, there was a class of people in Israel, we are told in 1 Chronicles 12 verse 32, who had understanding of the times to know what Israel ought to do. Will it be so, brothers and sisters and young people, just before Christ comes to be made king? Only we can answer that question. I believe there will be, because we can look at prophecy and see very plainly how it's being fulfilled before our very eyes. All the signs are converging. We know that our world is teetering on the verge of an economic precipice. All that's required is for the angels to pull the strings, some kind of manipulation to trigger the crisis that's coming, and the world will plunge into the time of trouble such as never was in our absence, which we'll see later on today. We have great need, as our Lord said to his disciples, to watch, brothers and sisters and young people. And this afternoon we're going to have a look at some very significant things that are happening in relation particularly to Europe and the Papacy. Britain is taking steps that will see it leave the European Union prior to Armageddon. Now, we're going to do something this afternoon that we don't often get the chance to do. We're going to actually laugh, have a good belly laugh, while we're watching Bible prophecy come to pass before our eyes. You don't believe me, do you? Wait, you'll see, because I've done it all before. You're going to laugh while you're watching Bible prophecy fulfilled. Well, we're going to have a look at the young lions. We're going to ask, who are they and who isn't a young lion? And the prospects of a black pope. We're going to have a look at the papacy mingling itself with the seed of men, and that's happening right now. We're going to have a look at Europe rebuilding the Holy Roman Empire, the Fourth Reich. Hitler wasn't successful in building the third and making it last for 1,000 years, so they're having another go. They're building the Fourth Reich. And at the end of this talk this afternoon, if we get there, we'll have a look at 2060 as being the year of the demise of the papacy and the Holy Roman Empire. Not necessarily of all those who adhere to it, as we shall see, but that's the year of the demise of the system. So that's what's in front of us this afternoon. Now, many years ago I heard someone say that Britain would be part of Nebuchadnezzar's image because Britain was an essential part of the Roman Empire. Well, that's true. Britain was a part of the Roman Empire on the fringes of the West. Yeah, and important men came from there, didn't they? Constans and his son Constantine, who developed the city of Constantinople in the east eventually. Yes. But brothers and sisters and young people, Britain is not part of the image of Nebuchadnezzar. Proof for that. Now we know the image of Nebuchadnezzar has two legs, and on the end of those legs there are feet. When Brother Thomas wrote the exposition of Daniel in 1854, he said that the feet had not yet been formed. And in fact, they're only now being formed, slowly but surely, as we're going to see, because something essential had to happen for the formation of the feet. And that's why we've read Daniel chapter 2 this afternoon, and we'll have a look at a couple of verses there a little later on. In 420 AD, the Roman Empire was finally resolved into two legs. It had gone through many iterations. There were times when it had 4 divisions and times when it had 3 divisions. But it was not until 420 AD when the reigning emperor, in its final days, this empire, divided his empire into 2 parts and gave 1 part to each of his sons. And they ruled as separate emperors over 2 sections of the Roman Empire. That happened in 420 AD. And Rome had left Britain in 410 AD. So when the 2 legs were formed, and they weren't formed up until 420, when the 2 legs of iron were formed, Britain was no longer part of the Roman Empire. Rome had left. They'd been gone for 10 years. And the feet, with its 10 toes, is a confederation of European states that will be united for a time, ultimately by the influence of Gog after the papacy's done its work. It'll be a brittle fusion of democracy and false religion, as we're going to see in a moment. So here's the end of Roman rule. They began to move out slowly in 383. By 407, the final departure of the southeast. By 409, the Roman magistrates were expelled. By 410, the Romans were gone. Britain, we know, is clearly the Tarshish of Ezekiel 38 and verse 13. Britain, the land of tin, Britannia. I've been to Cornwall, been to a few tin mines down there. I've seen a Phoenician well on the coast of Cornwall. They inhabited that area for a time. And of course they were there for tin, as Ezekiel 27 tells us. Britain, with its young lions, will oppose Gog's invasion of the land, as we know. But who are the young lions? You know, for a long time we've been saying that America is a young lion. America's not a young lion. You've done the exercise that I have done. You've looked through the writings of Brother John Thomas. Everything he wrote. He doesn't say anything about America being a young lion. In fact, he says some very unflattering things about the American system of government, brothers and sisters and young people. And I've been to Washington many times, and every time I go there, I'm impressed that America is far more French than it is British. They hated the British. They fought a war of independence against the British from 1781 to 1783. You know who won the War of Independence for the Americans? The French. They sent their fleet to block the entrance to the Chesapeake Bay so that the British could not supply their army at Yorktown on the James River from New York. The French had as many troops on the ground in that battle as the Americans. If it hadn't been for the French and for men like Colonel Lafayette, whose statue is there across from the White House, in Lafayette Park, there's this huge bronze statue. You walk 100 yards down the road and you find out that the first finance minister of the American government was a Frenchman. Then you find out that the Triangle of Washington was designed by a French architect. And you find out that their constitution came from the French constitution. And you know that the Statue of Liberty was given to the Americans by the French. And then you find out that the Americans had to be dragged into the First World War by Churchill arranging, and you're going to be shocked by this, but I can prove it, Churchill arranging the sinking of the American ship Lusitania. That dragged the Americans into the First World War. You know what had to happen? Because Britain was about to ask Germany for armistice terms. They were bankrupt. Had lost so many men in the fields of Flanders. Britain was about to capitulate. So they dragged America in, and that tipped the balance of the First World War. What about the Second World War? Post-Depression. The Americans had absolutely no interest in coming into the Second World War. They had an anti-European war movement led by Charles Lindbergh, a peace movement. They wanted nothing to do with it until, of course, God got the Japanese to bomb Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941. Then they were in it. Up till that point, they were happy to produce tanks and ships and sell them to the British, and the British, of course, finally paid that off, but it took them a long time. So the Americans are not a young lion, and America is about to be KO'd. When this next big depression comes, and it's not far away, as we shall see, they're going to be KO'd, out of the picture. It'll be Britain and her young lions. Australia, Canada, India, New Zealand, that will be there to oppose Gog when it comes down upon the land. But we've got a problem. Britain today is still part of the European Union. Both Conservative and Labor parties in the UK have strongly supported being in that union. Since 1968, it was Edward Heath, the Conservative, who took them in. However, Britain has strenuously refused to use the euro and retained the pound as its currency. Pretty wise decision. And the current Conservative government of David Cameron is a strong supporter of continued membership of the EU, but he's on the wrong side of that because the British people have got different ideas. Now, in a moment, I'm going to sit down and let you watch an 11-minute movie. That's a bit of a bonus, isn't it? And you're going to laugh. You will laugh because, you see, we've got to ask the question, How has it happened that public sentiment in Britain is now against remaining in the European Union? How has God worked to bring to pass the prophecy that Britain will be in the opposition to Gog and not part of Europe anymore? How's that happen? Well, as we know, God chooses his instruments very carefully. And you're going to see a man in here who's part of that program. So here we go. Now, you can read on the screen, but I'm just going to say a few things before I do sit down. Bible prophecy requires Britain, Tarshish, to be separate from Europe at the time of Armageddon. They're about to hold a referendum because public opinion is now strongly in favour of getting out. God's instrument, as I said, is the leader of the UKIP, UK Independence Party, a man called Nigel Farage. And there he is. Now, he has been in the European Parliament since 1999, and for 15 years he's harassed the European parliamentary members, including this gentleman, Herman Van Rompuy. Van Rompuy, a former Prime Minister of Belgium, is now the head of the European Council, the President. He's the Pope's man in the EU. This is how Farage welcomed him.
President of the Europe of Freedom and Democracy.
When we had a president, we'd see a giant global political figure. The man that would be the political leader for 500 million people. The man that would represent all of us on the world stage. The man whose job was so important that, of course, you're paid more than President Obama. Well, I'm afraid what we got was you. And I'm sorry, but after that performance earlier that you gave, and I don't want to be rude, but you know, really, you have the charisma of a damp rag and the appearance of a low-grade bank clerk. And the question that I want to ask, that we're all going to ask is, who are you? I'd never heard of you. Nobody in Europe had ever heard of you. I would like to ask you, President, who voted for you? And what mechanism? Oh, I know democracy is not popular with you lot. And what mechanism do the peoples of Europe have to remove you? Is this European democracy? Well, I sense though, that you're competent and capable and dangerous. And I have no doubt that it's your intention to be the quiet assassin of European democracy and of the European nation states. You appear to have a loathing for the very concept of the existence of nation states. Perhaps that's because you come from Belgium, which of course is pretty much a non-country. But since you took over, we've seen Greece reduced to nothing more than a protectorate. Sir, you have no legitimacy in this job at all, and I can say with confidence that I can speak on behalf of the majority of the British people in saying, we don't know you, we don't want you, and the sooner you're put out to grass, the better.
And now for the EFD group, Mr. Farage.
Another one bites the dust. Country number 4, Spain, gets bailed out, and we all, of course, know that it won't be the last. Though I wondered over the weekend whether perhaps I was missing something, because when the Spanish Prime Minister, Mr. Reich, got up, he said that this bailout shows what a success the Eurozone has been. And I thought, well, having listened to him over the previous couple of weeks telling us there wouldn't be a bailout, I've got the feeling after all his twists and turns, he's just about the most incompetent leader in the whole of Europe. And that's saying something, because there's pretty stiff competition. Indeed, every single prediction of yours, Mr. Barroso, has been wrong. And dear old Herman Van Rompuy, well, he's done a runner, hasn't he? Because the last time he was here, he told us we'd turned the corner, that the euro crisis was over, and he hasn't bothered to come back and see us. You know, I remember being here 10 years ago and hearing the launch of the Lisbon Agenda. We were told that with the euro by 2010 we would have full employment, and indeed that Europe would be the competitive and dynamic powerhouse of the world. By any objective criteria, the euro has failed, and in fact there is a looming impending disaster. You know, this deal makes things worse, not better. 100 billion is put up for the Spanish banking system, and 20% of that money has to come from Italy. And under the deal, the Italians have to lend to the Spanish banks at 3%, but to get that money, they have to borrow on the markets at 7%. It's genius, isn't it? It really is brilliant. So what we're doing with this package is we're actually driving countries like Italy towards needing to be bailed out themselves. In addition to that, we put a further 10% on Spanish national debt, and I tell you, any banking analyst will tell you 100 billion doesn't solve the Spanish problem. It would need to be more like 400 billion. And with Greece teetering on the edge of euro withdrawal, the real elephant in the room is that once Greece leaves, the ECB, the European Central Bank, is bust. It's gone. It has 444 billion euros worth of exposure to the bailed out countries. And to rectify that, you'll need to have a cash call from Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Greece and Italy. You couldn't make it up, could you? It is total and utter failure. This ship, the Euro Titanic, has now hit the iceberg, and sadly there simply aren't enough lifeboats.
You know.
Now, on behalf of the FD Group, Mr. Farage.
Thank you. I want to begin today on a happy note to remember that it is 20 years ago this very week that the United Kingdom, having been signed up by the Conservative government to the exchange rate mechanism, broke out of the exchange rate mechanism. It was a great liberation for us, and of course, once having been bitten, we didn't join the euro project, thank goodness. Sadly, the same is not true for much of the rest of Europe. And I thought, through the last 18 months or so, that the economic logic of why Britain left the ERM would apply particularly to those Mediterranean countries, and I foresaw that actually those countries would leave the Eurozone probably with Greece leaving this year. But I now have to accept that I've been wrong about that, because I had totally underestimated the complete fanaticism, Mr. Barroso, of you, your College of Commissioners and the European Central Bank. You've come out fighting on all fronts. Today you announced there's going to be a banking union, yet more centralised control, yet more regulation. You make it clear that whilst you think the nation state should continue to exist, it mustn't have any democratic powers. All democracy is to be vested here under what you call the community method, which of course means that your unelected commission has the sole right to present that legislation. So I don't believe you when you say that, and I find the tone of much of what has been said and done over the last few days really very worrying. Mario Draghi, now known by some that believe in the euro as Super Mario, well, he showed us his big bazooka the other day. He upped the stakes, and he told us, and it's to me an odd concept, that he had unlimited money. Now, I don't think money grows on trees, and I think that money is limited to what the German, Dutch and Finnish taxpayers are prepared to put in. But he's made it clear, his intention. He will fight to the last German taxpayer to keep the Mediterranean countries that should never have joined the euro in there. And you've got, of course, the Prime Minister now of Italy, perhaps we ought to call him Monstrous Mario, who made it clear last week that he feared that nation-state democracy could bring down the European Union, and therefore we have to bypass nation-state democracy and pass all the powers here. Your henchman, Olli Rehn, who's here today, I mean, he dares to tell countries when they should and should not have general elections. He's urging Spain to accept a full bailout so that they too are trapped in the euro prison. You know, I have to accept that you now have the whip hand over the citizens of Europe, and I now think that this euro crisis will go on for a whole miserable decade. In the end, you will have to face the reality that even France and Germany cannot survive together in the same economic and monetary union. And certainly with President Hollande reducing retirement ages, upping minimum wages and bringing in a hate tax for the successful, which will see all the entrepreneurs leave France, I'm afraid that gap will get bigger. And I wonder where the hope comes for those that believe in nation-state democracy. Well, we've heard that the German court this morning has decided that the ESM is okay. Maybe the Finns will say they've had enough. Maybe the Germans, as a country, will say we no longer are going to go on feeling ashamed and guilty of what our grandparents' generation did, and we'll start to stand up for our own economic interest. I don't know, but I suspect that the best hope we've got actually comes from the United Kingdom, where now the demand for a referendum is stronger than it's ever been, where a Conservative Prime Minister is in very deep trouble. And I think, Mr Barroso, today, the British people hearing you calling for the European Union to become a global power, making it absolutely clear that member states must obey what you tell them, whether they're in the relatively wealthy north or the poorer south. I think those comments, this emerging, creeping Euro dictatorship, is something that will repulse millions of British people, and the only good news I take from today is you've helped to bring that referendum just a little bit closer.
Yes, and a bill for a referendum in 2017 has been passed in the House of Commons. I think it may come quicker than that. Well, brothers and sisters and young people, as I said, you can actually see, can't you, Bible prophecy being fulfilled through God's instrument, that man. Well, just one final slide on Britain and her allies. You go back to this slide which we saw the other day. The old lion defies his foe. Helped by the young lions, the old lion defies his foes. The young lions of the First World War were Australia, Canada, India and New Zealand. And among the countries who survived the global financial crisis of 2008, the best were Australia, Canada, India and New Zealand. Now that's by coincidence, of course. Perhaps not. Perhaps that, brothers and sisters, is Bible prophecy being fulfilled as well. All have a British system of government, and 3 share the Queen as their titular head of state. It'll be those countries that back Britain against the Gogian invasion of the land, Ezekiel 38. Let's move on to the Pope. March this year saw the election of Francis I from Argentina. He's the first Jesuit to become Pope. In all of the history of the Catholic Church, the first Jesuit. You know why? Well, Jesuits are the stormtroopers of the Catholic Church. They are the lower order, you know, the front-line troops that go out and do the murderous things that they did in the Inquisition, etc. So they've never elected a Pope from amongst the Jesuits in the past. That's why this man is actually called a Black Pope. Black Pope because he comes from the lower order of priests. Cardinals wear red, and of course he was a cardinal when they elected him, but he spent most of his life in the lower order of priests, just as an ordinary priest. So he's called a Black Pope. One brother in America, a wit, said to me when he was elected, you know, you're always talking about 13 being the number of rebellion, and 13 is the number of Nimrod. He was the 13th generation from Adam, and Nimrod was the first pope, wasn't he? The first god king of the earth. And his father Cush put together the Catholic Catechism. Their doctrines came from the head of Cush. He says, you know, the Roman Catholic Church picked a new pope on the 13th of March, or 13/3/13, as the date's written at the Vatican, at 7:06 p.m. 7:06, 7 plus 6 is 13. All right? Well, I don't know if there's any significance in that, but I found that quite interesting. But you know, brothers and sisters and young people, I don't think there's any doubt that there will eventually be a Black Pope. There was one well in the running in this last election, and you know that. Well in the running for the papacy. It couldn't have happened 40 or 50 years ago, could it? But humanism, liberty, equality and fraternity has changed our world, and it won't be long. Whether the Black Pope that comes to power over that system is at Armageddon or at the destruction of the papacy in 2060, I don't know, but I'm pretty convinced in my own mind that there will be a black pope. Why? Well, because the first pope was black. The only known visage of Nimrod is negroid in features. He had dark skin. No wonder. He was a descendant of Ham, Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 to 8. So that's the only known visage of Nimrod. He was a black man. And that's the first pope. He's the one, he was the Pontifex Maximus of his day. And that title is borne by the popes of today. Nimrod, the 13th generation from Adam. As I said, the first God king and the founder of the kingdom of men. Now the papacy, along with the European nations, have been now for some time trying to rebuild, as I said earlier, the Holy Roman Empire, the Fourth Reich. Why did this man adopt the name Francis I? It has never been used in the history of the papacy. Why would he take that title, Francis I? Well, one of the reasons given is that his hero is Francis of Assisi, quite an important figure in the Catholic Church. But I think there's a more subtle and a more important reason. The last emperor of the Holy Roman Empire was Francis II. And when he abdicated in 1806 after the Battle of Austerlitz, when Napoleon had defeated his forces and was about to advance on Vienna, Francis II, the head of the Holy Roman Empire, sat down under compulsion and abdicated. And because the empire was dissolved, he went back to being called Francis I of Austria. And in 1814, 8 years later, when the Allies had defeated Napoleon and sent him to Elba, he got back much of his lost territory and much of his power. He was heading back to being Francis II, you could say. So I don't think there's any doubt that this name's been chosen for a more subtle reason. Because this is what they are doing. They're rebuilding the Holy Roman Empire, which Napoleon destroyed under the hand of God. They've had 3 attempts and they're now in their 4th. And it won't be very long and it will come into existence. And Christ and the saints will destroy that empire, as we shall see a bit later. Pope Francis presents himself as a liberal-minded, caring figure, a man of the people. He's recently given hope to homosexuals that they have a place in the church, even though Roman Catholic law is no homosexuality. In November 2013, he began a worldwide consultation of the Diocese of the Catholic Church, including questions about pastoral care for certain groups of people, same-sex couples and remarried divorcees. Well, what about the work of this man? Francis has called for church reform and for Catholics to do more about poverty. He seeks closer relations with other religions, is moving to do what John Paul II in 20-odd years failed to do, to repair relations with the Russian Orthodox Church. And that's very important in relation to Bible prophecy. In November 2013, the Pope called for closer ties with Islam and said that Christians should embrace Muslim immigrants with affection and respect. Good grief. That's a change of direction. The Pope and Putin met in the Vatican on the 25th of November to discuss Syria, amongst other things. Now, this is interesting, isn't it? We don't know what they talked about. He had 45, 50 minutes. But we do know this, that since March this year, this man has made such a mark on our world that the Time magazine made him Person of the Year for 2013. Now, when they award the Person of the Year, it's not for good people, so to speak. It's not about virtues. It's about influence on the world. And the runner-up, the 2 runners-up for this award were Edward Snowden. He's the man who's delivering secrets to the world from, the archives of the American Secret Service. And Bashar al-Assad, who was murdering his own people at an alarming rate. All right? So it's not about virtue, is it? It's about influence. And the influence of this man in 9 or 10 months is just unbelievable. That's why I put him up there, because I want to talk to you about him, I believe, fulfilling Bible prophecy. Now, this is what came out of the Time website as to the reasons why this man was made Person of the Year. They're talking here about significant shifts in the church. John Paul II and Benedict XVI were professors of theology. Francis is a former janitor, nightclub bouncer, chemical technician, and literature teacher. And behind his self-effacing facade, he is a very canny operator. He makes masterly use of the 21st century tools to perform his first century office. But what makes this Pope so important is the speed with which he has captured the imagination of millions who had given up on hoping for the church at all. You know, I just heard the other day, they were interviewing people in the streets of Rome, and they came across a couple of women, and they said, do you listen to the Pope's speeches? And they said, we do now. But when Benedict XVI was there, when the Pope came on the Italian radio, they switched it off. But when Pope Francis I comes on now, they listen to him. He's made a huge difference. He is quoted saying of women who consider abortion because of poverty or rape, who can remain unmoved before such painful situations? Of gay people, he says, if a homosexual person is of good will and is in search of God, I am no one to judge. To divorced and remarried Catholics who are, by rule, forbidden from taking communion, he says that this crucial right is not a prize for the perfect, but a powerful medicine and nourishment for the weak. Can you see what this man's doing? Well, I want to show you what he's doing, scripturally, what he's doing. I want to take you now to Daniel chapter 2, that passage that was read for us this afternoon. We're going to have a look just 2 verses. Verse 41 and verse 43, and they're the 2 verses you can see on the screen. Verse 41 says, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, this is the image of Nebuchadnezzar that's going to stand up in the latter days, when Gog conquers the land of Israel, or largely conquers the land of Israel. That's when the image stands up. It's got feet here, part of potter's clay and part of iron. Now, they're in the process of being formed now. And the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. Now, the only thing that's left of the iron of the Roman Empire is its religion, Catholicism. That's all that's left of the iron. And the clay, of course, initially represented those barbarian nations who came down on the Roman Empire in the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries and broke it up bit by bit, and they took control of Rome's territory. This is not about that. This is about another phase. And we're in it right now. Because you see, historically, the barbarians mingled themselves with the iron. This says it's the iron that mingles itself with the clay. Now, as you can see, there's a word here in the Hebrew Chaldee dictionary, garaf. It's used 4 times. It's rendered in the AV mixed in verse 41, and in verse 43, mixed, mingle, and mixed. 4 times. It means to co-mingle, to bring 2 things together, from the root to braid or to intermix, and by extension to traffic, as if by bartering. Also to give or be security, being the idea of a guarantor. And it's translated that way in Genesis 44:32 as, be surety for my brother. And it was the Roman Catholic system that had that, you might say, underwriting role when 6 nations met in March of 1956 near the Vatican in the Campidoglio to put together the European Economic Community, which is now called the European Union. It began with 6, very fittingly, 6 nations, now has 27. So you see, brothers and sisters, this is about latter-day things. This is not about clay mingling itself with the iron of the Roman Empire. This is about iron taking the initiative to mingle itself with the clay which is described in verse 43 as the seed of men. Look at it, verse 43. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed or mingled with miry clay, they, the iron, shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, the clay. But they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. What that's telling us is that Catholicism, just before Armageddon, was going to take the initiative to mingle itself with the democratic powers over whom it wanted to rule, namely the European nations. And how can they do that? The rigidity of John Paul II, who made Cardinal Ratzinger the guard of doctrine in the church. Ratzinger, who becomes Pope Benedict XVI, rigid doctrinaire, will not budge on Catholic doctrine and practice. And so people left the church, or at least turned their back on the church in droves. How was this going to happen? Well, put in a man from Argentina who's been living on one lung for 20 years, at 76 years of age, and send him out as from the lower order of people, very personable, very affable, friend of the people. He won't budge an inch on Catholic doctrine, but he's got you thinking he will. Now, has our community understood this? Yes, it has. This is a quotation from Henry Sully, early part of the 20th century. Iron mingled with clay. In the second chapter of Daniel, the kingdoms have been represented by a composite image consisting of 4 principal elements: first gold, second silver, third brass, and fourth iron, each element representing some phase of the kingdoms of men. This is the important part. The fourth element, in its latter-day phase, assumes the aspect of clay and iron mixed. That is, republicanism and autocracy, shown perhaps in one of the most subtle aspects, notice this, subtle aspects, in the silent capture of democracy by autocratic ecclesiasticism, enabling the latter to ride into power thereby. You could not get a better description of what Daniel chapter 2, verses 41 to 43 is about than that. And it's happening right now. We're not very far away, brothers and sisters, from the culmination of these things in the Battle of Armageddon. Yes, Europe is setting about to revive the Holy Roman Empire. As it was clearly set out in this book, the principality and power of Europe, Britain and the emerging Holy Roman Empire. That's why on the French euro coin that they first minted, you had the head of Charlemagne. Talk a bit more about him in a moment. And on the other side of this coin, guess what you had on the French coin? You know, no prizes for guessing. On the opposite side, liberty, equality and fraternity. You have iron on one side and you have clay on the other. That's what they're about. But they're about to meet their doom. Now, this is the pattern of Roman Catholic resistance to Christ for 40 years after Armageddon, as best as we can ascertain from the prophetic scriptures. And there are many of them that speak of this, from the beginning of the Bible to the end. Armageddon, of course, we'll see, as you can see from this line that drops down a cliff, Armageddon's going to be a massive blow to Catholicism. But in the 10 years after Armageddon, before Rome itself is destroyed, as Revelation 14 verse 8 tells us, when it's destroyed, Psalm 2 will have been fulfilled. Why do the nations assemble themselves together? I've set my king upon my holy hill of Zion, says Yahweh in verse 6 of Psalm 2. Why are they doing this? Well, they're doing it because the papacy is organising a rebellion against the rule of Christ in terms of their doctrine, their Jesuit doctrine, which has been adopted by many churches around us, of the Antichrist. That this one who sets himself up in Jerusalem is going to be the Antichrist. Yeah, they'll swallow it, hook, line and sinker. And they will oppose Christ's rule. When Rome's destroyed, heavy blow, won't stop them. They will revert to Central Europe and they will complete the rebuilding of the Holy Roman Empire just at the time when Elijah's got returning Israel. Something like 12 million of them. there in the body of Europe, in what's called biblically the wilderness of the peoples. And that's going to lead, brothers and sisters and young people, to the destruction of this system. It's going to be destroyed by Christ and the saints, but some considerable time after Armageddon. We know that. What is the year? Well, 2060. Now, you in Daniel? I want you to move to Daniel 7, if you wouldn't mind. Daniel 7. Verse 7 talks about this fourth empire, the Roman Empire, with its 10 horns. And of course the 10 horns tells us that it would be broken up into 10 parts, have 10 nations formed on its body politic. The barbarian nations, of course, who came in to break up the Roman Empire. That's how it ended up. Well, verse 8. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of man, and a mouth speaking great things. So, what's this all about? Well, Sir Isaac Newton knew what it was about. Yeah, he knew what it was about. Sir Isaac Newton was a mathematician and physicist who lived between 1642 and 1727. It's a long time ago. One of the most fabulous scientific intellects of history, leave alone of his own time. He wrote on religion. He rejected the Trinity as unscriptural and predicted 2060 as the year of the demise of the Papacy. He wrote that in the early 1700s. What are we now? 2013, nearly 14. Hey? How'd he do that? There's a note in the margin of his Bible to this effect that's been seen by a brother who lives in Halifax, Nova Scotia, with whom I spent some time a little while back. He's seen the note in this man's Bible. Pope destroyed 2060. Hey? How'd he do that? Well, correctly interpreting prophecy. That's how he did it. His private papers had to be kept secret, of course, because the church would have been after his hide. He had to keep it secret. Daniel 7 verse 8 is about the development of the Holy Roman Empire and its ultimate fall. I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man. Yes, they call it the Holy See. Got priests everywhere watching for Rome. And a mouth speaking great things. Yes, issuing encyclicals, which of course Pope Pius IX in 1870 said, when in ex cathedra, was infallible. Yeah, mouth speaking great things. So what happened here? What happened in history to fulfil this prophecy? Well, in the late 600 ADs and early 700 ADs, the papacy fell out with the Roman emperors who were ruling from Constantinople. That's way over in the east. So here's the Roman Catholic Church in Rome, way over in the east, in Constantinople. The Roman emperors decided that they were going to give up idolatry. They weren't going to worship idols anymore. And they said to the Pope, we're not going to worship idols, we want you to get rid of yours. He said, go jump in the lake. Well, they said, okay, we'll jump in the lake, but you can row your own canoe. So they left him to his own devices, and the Lombards in northern Italy said, you beauty, we've been wanting to get back at this fella for some time. So they started to make life very difficult for him. In the end, he was so desperate, he had to send to the King of France, a man called Pepin, to get some help. In 754, Pepin came down, and in several campaigns he defeated the 3 Lombard kingdoms, and then in 758 he gave them to the Pope. He gave these 3 Lombard kingdoms, the horns that were on the head of the Roman beast. He plucked them up and he gave them to the Pope. It wasn't though the actual start of the Holy Roman Empire. It took a little while to come to pass. By the way, you see this gentleman here? That's Pope Pius XII. He was the papal nuncio in Germany in 1930 and 33 when Hitler came to power in Germany. He was the man that signed the Concordat with Hitler about the destruction of the Jews. Yeah. Look what he's got on his head. Looks pretty big, doesn't it? That's because it's a triple tiara crown. That crown was created to celebrate the plucking up of the 3 Lombard kingdoms and them being given to the Pope as part of his empire. All right? Well, history went on. It was the son of Pepin, Charlemagne, Charles the Great, who was finally crowned Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire in 800 AD on this very day, 25th of December, 800 AD. How do we know that's true? Well, on the back of the French coin, euro coin, with the head of Charlemagne are 2 dates, 800 to 814. He died in 814. He'd been king for decades before 800. So 800 is the time he becomes the emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. The Europeans know that. So 800 AD, Christmas Day, is very, very important. This is when the Holy Roman Empire came into existence, the first Reich. So when's it going to end? Well, we're told that in verse 25. Daniel 7, verse 25. And he shall speak great words against the Most High, and shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and think to change times and laws. And they shall be given into his hand until a times, and a dividing of time. And the judgment shall sit, they'll take away his dominion, and the kingdom will be given to the saints, to the people of the saints of the Most High. Read Christ in the saints. Okay? So he's going to have an end. When? Well, he's been given a time, until a times, and the dividing of time. And what's that all about? Well, as I said this morning, there were 360 days in a Jewish year, and it's called a time. It's like in Daniel chapter 4, 7 times were to pass over Nebuchadnezzar when he went out with the disease of lycanthropy. Remember that? Became like an animal? 7 times. Yeah, history records 7 years. So a time is a Jewish year. A Jewish year had 360 days in it, which is why the Jews got to put a 13th month in every 7 or 8 years to catch up with us. Otherwise they can't go swimming in summer. Jewish time's 360. Times is 2 times. Times. So you got 360, twice 360, and a dividing. Divided in half, of course. Half of 360 is 180. You add 360 and 720 and 180, you get 1,260 days, or on the day for a year principle, 1,260 years. Does this work in history? Yes. AD 312, the triumph of Constantine at the Battle of Milvian Bridge over Maxentius was the beginning of the persecution of the witnesses against the system that he created. 1,260 years later, the effective end of witnessing against the Catholic system, the massacre of St. Bartholomew's Day, 1572. Exactly 1,260 years. AD 529 to 533, the Justinian decrees were issued giving the Bishop of Rome headship of the Church, gave him political power in the West. You add 1260, it comes to 1789 to 1793. The French Revolution began in 1789, it came to its height in 1793. Catholicism was undermined in Europe. In AD 608 to 610, this grubby little emperor in the east called Phocas granted the papacy temporal power, political power, real political power over land and people. You add 1260. 1868 to 1870. Garibaldi came up from the south. He pushed the Pope eventually out of Rome, and he lost his temporal power. The Pope responded to that. It was the longest serving Pope in history, 38 years, Pope Pius IX, the only one with a statue outside the Vatican, by calling the First Vatican Council and declaring himself infallible. That was his response. It works every time. But people say, but this is the Gregorian calendar put together by Pope Gregory the 13th. Can't be right, surely. Yes, it is. providing you stay in it. Providing you're using the dates, the early dates from that calendar, you stay in it, it's perfect. Absolutely perfect. It works every time, brothers and sisters and young people. And I believe there's no doubt it will work again. So what are the important dates? 758 AD. Pepin, king of France, conquers 3 barbarian states in Italy, gave them to the Pope. 800 AD, Pope Leo crowned Charlemagne emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. You add 1260 to 758, you get 2018. I believe, because the reverse always happens, the Pope is going to acquire all the power he needs in Europe by 2018, and he'll get that on the back of the greatest depression in human history that's going to catapult the southern European nations into his arms. All you the northern ones, they'll hive off. And what we will have is the restoration of the Roman Empire, which was in southern Europe up to the Rhone. 800 AD, at 1260, this is why Sir Isaac Newton arrived at this date, 2060. That, we believe, will be the end. Not of all Catholics, as we're going to see just in a second. I'm going to take another minute or two if you don't mind. Here is the program, as Brother Sully very plainly and rightly points out in his book on the Temple of Ezekiel's prophecy in chapter 2. There will be a 50-year period from the resurrection of the dead until the time that Christ walks his bride around a completed temple about to go into operation. Towards the end of that, Christ will reveal his bride to the world in the marriage supper of the Lamb. But he will not do that, Revelation 19 tells us, until he's exposed the Catholic harlot for what she is, the harlot. And when that's been done, then he will reveal his bride to the world. It's a clear message of Revelation chapter 19. I was going to say a bit about that, but we've got to move on. Because here we come to the last slide. How long, O Lord, was the cry of those who suffered at the hands of this system? Well, not too long. There's a 50-year period from the resurrection of the dead to the bride being walked around by the house by the builder of it, as Ezekiel 40 tells us. And Armageddon will be 10 years beyond the resurrection of the dead, because there's a lot of things to be done in between. What are we looking at? Well, we're looking at this. If 2060 is the date of the destruction of the Holy Roman Empire and the Papacy, and if you want to have a look at Revelation 19 verse 20 and 21, it may be very helpful. Revelation 19 verse 20 says, "And the beast," read the Holy Roman Empire, as Brother Thomas points out in Eureka, "the beast was taken, and with him the false prophet," read the Pope, "that wrought signs before him, which he deceived the world around him. These both were cast alive," it says in the last sentence of that verse, "into a lake of fire burning with brimstone. And the remnant was slain." So you see, the destruction of the system, the destruction of the empire that supports the system, doesn't see the immediate end of all the adherents to the system. Because verse 21 says, "And the remnant was slain with the sword of him that sat upon the horse." It will take some considerable time to clean up the remnant in the wake of the destruction of the empire and the papacy itself. That will come in 2060. So what does that mean to you and me? Well, it means this, that the length of that period to clean up the remnant will determine how long we've got. Now, I don't know what that period is. I've got no idea. But it can't be too long. If Christ had come in 2013, that period would have been 3 years. Do the maths. If Christ comes in 2014, that period's 4 years. Christ comes in 2015, all right, it'll be 5 years. And brothers and sisters, the fact is, we can see by the signs that he's very close. No question, he's very close. That is about to become a reality.